If we are really looking out for national security, if we're looking out for the security of America, it doesn't make sense because now we're establishing that we cannot be relied upon when our friends and our allies call on us. It is important that we don't set a precedence that if we ever need help, that people say, well, you know what? You didn't have your friends and allies' backs, so why should we have yours? This is bigger than just this moment. We have to recognize that this is a huge moment right now for the Ukrainian people, but it's also a huge moment for the world as well as America. And it is time to do what's right, even if it means that you could lose your job. At least you know that the history books will look kindly upon you because you did what was right for the American people.
The visionary Ben Shapiro, editor emeritus of the Daily Wire and host of the top conservative podcast in America, wrote, "Why Mike Johnson is correct" on Thursday. His defense of Mike Johnson has been reinforced by Mark Levin and General Jack Keane. In supporting the people of Taiwan is crucial to be a deterrence to the Chinese Communist Party invading and saving hundreds of thousands of lives. As the son of a flying tiger in World War II, who served in Kunming, Shangtu, and Xi'an, I grew up with appreciation of the people of Chinese heritage. America will stand with the people of Taiwan, with South Korea, Japan, Israel, and Ukraine. We're the greatest nation on earth, and we have to act like this. This is a basic Reagan republicanism. In conclusion, God bless our troops who successfully protected America for 20 years as the global war on terrorism moves from the Afghanistan safe haven to America. We do not need new border laws. We need to enforce existing laws. Biden shamefully opens borders for dictators as more 9/11 attacks across America are as imminent, as repeatedly warned by the FBI. I yield back.
The gentleman from South Carolina.
And Congressman, I mean, as for the fate of the House Speaker Mike Johnson, what do you think? I mean, if it comes down to it and he needs Democratic votes to survive, is that something you can get on board with? If he gives Democrats something like aid to Ukraine, where do you stand on that?
I'm not voting for Speaker Johnson at all. I will continue to stand and vote for my leader, that is Leader Jeffries, but I will tell you this. If this speaker is smarter than the previous one, McCarthy, then what he will do is he will talk to our leadership. He will talk with Leader Jeffries. He will ask Leader Jeffries what it would take to make sure that he could save his job if that's something that he's looking forward to do. The one thing that I can say about McCarthy, if I had something nice to say about him, it would be that, you know what, he said basically to hell with it. You know what, I'm going to do what's right, and that means keeping this government open. The fact that we are debating whether or not there will be support for Putin and allowing Putin to continue to wage this unrelentless and unwarranted war against Ukraine is absolutely, it boggles my mind. But here is the other part. If we are really looking out for national security, if we're looking out for the security of America, it doesn't make sense because now we're establishing that we cannot be relied upon when our friends and our allies call on us. It is important that we don't set a precedence that if we ever need help, that people say, well, you know what? You didn't have your friends and allies' backs, so why should we have yours? This is bigger than just this moment. We have to recognize that this is a huge moment right now for the Ukrainian people, but it's also a huge moment for the world as well as America. And it is time to do what's right, even if it means that you could lose your job. At least you know that the history books will look kindly upon you because you did what was right for the American people.
President Ronald Reagan said, "We cannot play innocence abroad in a world that is not innocent, nor can we be passive when freedom is under siege." The free world is under attack as Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, the Ayatollahs, and Kim Jong-un are teaming up to destroy any glimpse of freedom and democracy in their path. Deterrence is not divisible, and history has shown that when the free world wavers, adversaries see a green light. Taiwan Foreign Minister Joseph Wu said recently that the United States failing to support Ukraine would embolden Xi Jinping and support Beijing's propaganda that the United States is not a reliable partner. We want our allies and partners to turn to the United States, not to the Chinese Communist Party, who wants to replace the American dream with this authoritarian vision in a quest to become the superpower, top economic and military power by 2027.
This package makes important investments in our defense capabilities to deter this aggression. Without it, we will produce fewer submarines, we will produce fewer anti-ship missiles, and underfund the requirements of our commanders in the region. And Madam Speaker, our Kansans are at the forefront of producing the critical munitions, from Tomahawk missiles to Standard missiles to Naval Strike missiles, all funded in this package. Yes, Arkansas, like many other states, is the forge of the arsenal of democracy. So today's vote seems pretty simple to me. We're choosing between strength and weakness, between freedom and repression, and between prosperity and decline.
America's greatest writer, Mark Twain, is reputed to have said that history does not repeat itself, but it does sometimes rhyme. Tragically, the past 2 years have produced echoes of a dark time in world history, the 1930s. In the 1930s, evil regimes bent on aggression, domination, and even genocide took their first steps down a dark road that would eventually lead to World War. Tragically, the democratic West turned inward then, standing idly by while fascist regimes began to take aggressive actions against their weaker neighbors. There was time then to put a stop to aggression, if only we had had the fortitude and the wherewithal to stand firmly on the side of freedom. Today we're seeing uncomfortable parallels to that dark time. In Europe, Vladimir Putin launched an unjust and illegal invasion of his democratic neighbor, Ukraine. In Asia and the Pacific, the Chinese Communist Party encroaches on its neighbors and openly threatens the continued self-determination of Taiwan, a nation which continues to show the world what a free and democratic China could look like. And in the Middle East, Israel faces attacks on multiple fronts, beginning with the horrible terror attack launched by Hamas on October 7th, and continuing with an unprecedented direct aerial assault launched by the Iranian regime over the weekend. These events do not take place in a vacuum, Madam Speaker. They take place in regions around the world critical to American national security. They threaten our friends and partners around the globe and threaten the continued safety of democracy.
Weeks ago in a ghastly Russian prison. Why? Because they believe in liberty. Quote, "The time is near when on Ukraine's plains a shackled folk will burst its chains. Blessed be your children in these lands. By touch of your toil-hardened hands, then shall our day of hope arrive. Ukrainian glory shall revive." Today is that day. Support liberty for Ukraine. Defeat Russian tyranny. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I yield now to the gentleman from Alabama, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Mr. Rogers, for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank my friend for yielding. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of all these national security supplementals. The Armed Services Committee just completed our annual military posture review hearings with our combatant commanders. Each of them raised grave concerns about how China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are working together in a new axis of evil to harm our alliances and undermine our national security. Nowhere is this more important or apparent than in Ukraine. China, North Korea, and Iran are eagerly aiding and abetting Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine because they know a Russian victory there will seriously undercut American credibility and deterrence and leave our allies exposed. A Russian victory will embolden Kim, Xi, and the Ayatollah to confront South Korea, Taiwan, Israel, and ultimately the United States in a new and in fatal ways. And I fear Putin will use victory in Ukraine as a springboard to invade Eastern Europe. We can't let that happen. We must restore American deterrence. That starts by passing these national security supplementals.
Without gentleman from Florida reserves, the gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, the ranking member of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, Ms. Lee.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the distinguished ranking member for yielding and also for her tremendous leadership on global peace and security issues in this House. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of H.R. 8035. This bill provides nearly $10 billion in economic assistance for Ukraine and surrounding countries, with nearly $8 billion in direct budget support. Now, when I visited Ukraine in 2019, I immediately recognized the love of the Ukrainian people for their country and for their democracy. Since the war broke out, I've met with Ukrainians in the region. Actually, I was with Speaker Pelosi during that visit, and I've met and heard firsthand the dire situations that they face amidst Russian aggression. I've talked with civil society organizations funded by the United States who, facing danger and violence, are supporting refugees, vulnerable people, women, and children. I was deeply moved by their stories and their commitment. The United States must support these brave Ukrainians in their effort to protect their sovereignty, because, let's be clear, Putin will not stop until Ukraine's democracy is dismantled, and we all know that he will not stop with Ukraine. Now, as ranking member of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, I am proud that we are also considering other significant investments in United States global leadership today, particularly the more than $9 billion in desperately needed humanitarian assistance. We're facing historic challenges of hunger, displacement, and conflict across the globe. I was recently in Chad, one of the poorest countries in the world. Thousands of refugees are fleeing the horrific war in Sudan. They are in dire need of food and just the basics to survive. These resources will enable the United States to respond to not just the humanitarian needs that we read about on the front page, but the quieter conflicts that are destroying people's lives, such as in Sudan and Haiti. This is a defining moment in our history. I urge my colleagues to respond to the remarkable strength and resilience of the Ukrainian people and stand by them by supporting this supplemental bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you very much. I yield the gentleman from Texas, Mr. South, for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the Ukrainian Security Supplemental Appropriations Act, and I will make a glaring point. This war is not, economically speaking, even a fair fight. The gross domestic product of the European Union is 9 times that of Russia's. Their population is 3 times that of Russia's. The European Union can do more. If the United States continues to fund this effort, the EU will not muster the political will to do what they should. Yes, Russia is a strategic adversary of America, but it is a bigger threat to our European allies. NATO nations now, many are not doing the required 2% of GDP on defense. Europe must act with greater urgency. We've heard a lot about Churchill and Chamberlain. May I point out, they're both British. If the Great Britain and Europe as a whole had done more with Austria, with Sudetenland, history might be different. I implore my colleagues to put America's border security ahead of Ukraine's, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, the ranking member of the Defense Subcommittee, Ms. McCollum.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been 6 months since President Biden sent his security supplemental to the Congress, 2 months since the Senate passed it. But today, the House will finally act. And it's not a moment too soon, for the situation in Ukraine is dire. Vladimir Putin has failed to release thousands of Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped and continues to murder Ukrainian citizens on a daily basis. The Ukrainian military faces a severe shortage of ammunition to protect their citizens and their sovereignty. And why? Because for months this House has remained silent, but today that changes. Today we will pass this legislation. We will provide security and economic assistance to Ukraine. We will replenish depleted stocks of U.S. equipment here at home. And we will join and show the Baltic nations, Romania and Poland, that we stand with them, along with our European and NATO allies. Together, we will support the Ukrainian people in their fight for freedom. We will make it clear to authoritarian nations that America will always stand up for democracy here at home and around the world. I urge my colleagues to support these bills, and I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Flood, 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the supplemental for Ukraine. Less than 100 years ago, Joseph Stalin committed one of the largest genocides in history when he starved millions of Ukrainians to death. Today, Putin's Russia is once again stopping at nothing. They have used Ukrainian civilians as human shields, they've committed horrible acts of sexual violence, and they have abducted tens of thousands of Ukrainian children. The history of atrocities committed by tyrants against Ukraine is a stark reminder of the moral duty we have as Americans to stand with our friends and allies against tyranny and opposition. For those in our country who don't think what's happening in Ukraine has anything to do with us, Putin doesn't just want parts of Ukraine, he wants to end the post-World War II order that has underpinned freedom and economic prosperity in Europe, the United States, and beyond. This package is critical, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire free world so that we can beat back the reincarnation of what President Reagan called the evil empire. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, the ranking member of the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee, co-chair of the Ukrainian caucus. Mr. Quigley.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just back from a third trip to Ukraine during the war, and yes, we saw evidence of these Putin war crimes, the mass graves, evidence of torture, religious persecution, kidnapping of children. It reminds us that throughout our history, in moments like this, our country has been called to act, and it did. Called to stand up in the fight for freedom and in the face of tyranny, and to be the arsenal of democracy. But in recent months, we have not met this challenge. It's been said it's never too late to do the right thing. Well, we're coming really close, as we've been handcuffed by extremists and appeasers. And now the pipeline to Ukraine is almost empty. Should we now fail to send additional aid, Ukraine will lose this war, and in Putin's eyes, it will be just the beginning of his efforts to reconstitute the Soviet Union. Inaction risks not just the fate of democracy, but the possibility of drawing our own country directly into war. So today it's particularly important that we heed the voices from the past, from President Ronald Reagan as he espoused the Reagan Doctrine, that we will always defend our friends and allies against Soviet aggression. From President Kennedy saying, we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and success of liberty. And finally, in his last inaugural, FDR, who reminded us, we have learned that we cannot live alone, at peace, that our well-being is dependent on the well-being of other nations far away. We can and must act. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I would now like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Chief Jimenez.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the supplemental for Ukraine. For the past 2 years, Ukraine has valiantly fought against the barbaric and unjustified invasion by Vladimir Putin and Russia. We have now reached an inflection point. Ukraine is running out of time, bullets, and arms necessary to defeat Russia. This supplemental will allow Ukraine to counter Russia with new and more advanced aid. It will also help by replenishing U.S. weapons, stocks, and facilities. America is seen as the beacon of hope across the globe, and our enemies are watching our actions closely today. As the Chinese Communist Party, Iran, North Korea, and even Cuba all line up behind Putin, it is time to do the same for our friends and allies. When I was 6 years old, my family fled my native homeland of Cuba. I personally know the evils of communism. The freedoms of this country are what brought my family here. They are worth fighting for. The Ukrainian people are only asking for help in fighting for that same freedom. And what is the cost of freedom? Is there a cost for freedom? Can you put a price tag on it? Today is a chance to bolster our international reputation as a faithful ally and to prove that we will not falter under pressure. This is an opportunity to help our allies and discourage our adversaries. I urge support and yield back.
Gentleman, time's had expired. Gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I am prepared to close, and I reserve my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I also will reserve at this time.
Gentleman reserves.
Gentlewoman
from Connecticut is recognized.
I am ready to close, Mr. Chairman, if the gentlewoman as well.
Gentlelady from Connecticut, recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this needs to be a proud moment for all of us. This country, this great United States of America, has always led, has always taken the high ground and the moral responsibility to do the right thing. To support a nation which has only asked us to help them maintain their sovereignty, maintain democracy, and let them ally with us in the United States. The Speaker of this House has come out in support of aid to Ukraine. He said, and I quote, "History judges us for what we do." This is a critical time in the world, on the world stage, and the Speaker continued, "I would rather send bullets to Ukraine than American boys." We need to send military equipment, arms, what Ukraine needs to defeat an aggressor who is responsible for the death of millions of civilians. We have a moment today to say no to tyranny. We have a moment to take back the moral high ground for the United States, and that say we do not walk away from an ally. We do not walk away from freedom. We do not walk away from human rights. We do not walk away from democracy. That is not the United States of America. Winston Churchill once said, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." We know of no nation today who has had the courage to continue as Ukraine has. And the United States needs to have the courage to stand up and to help them continue when it counts and defeat a tyrant and autocrat whose relish for power knows no bounds. It is our moral responsibility. Today, we need to stand with Ukraine. I urge my colleagues to support this bill.
The gentlewoman has yielded back. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. In closing, we may be nearing a dangerous inflection point in this war. If the thug Putin were to win, it would be a disaster for our national security, frankly, on par with the Biden administration's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. Imagine how this outcome would embolden Russia's key strategic ally, Communist China, to undertake military coercion and aggression against Taiwan, and the fateful consequences that would stem from that. I want to remind my colleagues that appeasement never works. Harry Truman and Ronald Reagan both understood, as President Reagan said, and I quote, "We know only too well that war comes not when the forces of freedom are strong, but when they are weak. It is then that tyrants are tempted. It is time to be resolute. Let's heed the lessons of history and support this bill." Finally, I want to thank Speaker Johnson for his principled leadership and his fortitude in moving forward with this bill in the face of daunting obstacles. His resolve is a testament to his strength of character. I also want to thank Chairman Cole, Ranking Member DeLauro for their leadership on this bill. I urge a strong yes vote, and with that, I yield back the remaining part of my time.
The gentleman yields. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The amendment printed in Part A of the House Report 118-466 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill, as amended, shall be considered as read. No further amendment to the bill as amended is in order except those printed in Part B of House Report 118-466. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member.